fun. Why don't we get started? You guys ready? Thank you for joining us today. We are talking about gamification, level up your learning game. I am Cami Bean. I'm a senior solutions consultant with Kineo. I'm based in Massachusetts. And joining me today is Jolt. Jolt.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jolt Ola. I'm a learning consultant with Kineo with a good 20 years now in the R&D industry and maybe the last decade or so interest in games, gamification. I'm an author, speaker. You probably find me some of the conferences talking about engagement, motivation, and using game elements. Less about the entertainment side, more on the actual instructional design side of it. And recently, I'm really interested in data of how you use the actual gameful interactions and harvest some of the data so you can have, some insights out of this, not just entertainment. Also today, we're going to join us a special guest, as you can see, Hungarian Prairie 5, or what they say, or how they say, it's a Puszta 5. These horses and the little gentleman on top. We'll see what this mystery and how this mystery actually relates to gamification.
And I have to admit that I've been mystified by the Hungarian Prairie 5 as we've been preparing for this webinar. It's great to see such an international audience today. We have people from Switzerland, Felix from Berlin, Rachel from London, Karen from Toronto, Audie from Montreal, Stephanie from South Dakota, Glenn from Pittsburgh. Really exciting to see such a diverse audience, and thank you for joining us today. We will make today's webinar recording available in the next day or two, so you can feel free to share that with your teams, and we're just going to dive right in and hopefully get to some juicy stuff as we're talking.
And let me stop you right there, Cami, before we dive in. Just one more time to announce that there's this link. It's going to be on the top of your chat all through the webinar, paulev.com/Joel. So if you have questions either throughout the webinar or now that you want to get answers, just plug it in, and then we'll create kind of like an FAQ out of that. And also, we want to also know of where you are today on the landscape of gamification and games. And so before we start talking about what we think is important and why we're here, let us hear your version. So Sam, our friend's going to open up the poll here a little bit. And then our question is just, what's your experience level with games and gamification? So we know where you are today and where you want to be, obviously, at the end of the webinar. So let us know when the poll is up and where you are today in terms of skills, and then we can start continuing with the presentation.
Excellent. We didn't have a slide for our poll, Jolt.
We don't need slides for polls.
We don't need no dang slides.
So while you're answering these questions, I can see there's a good normal distribution going on here. Most of you are novice, read blogs, articles, maybe attended sessions and curious about it. Some of you even tried at work. Some of you absolutely curious, and nobody is a guru, it seems like. Yet, but maybe you'll get there. So we have a good landscape. So that's where we aim for those people who are interested in, maybe tried, maybe not. I don't know how much success you had. We'll try to give you today examples, things that you can take and apply tomorrow. And so let's go back and actually start this session. Okay, Cami, take it away.
Excellent. So one of the challenges in the digital learning space, the e-learning space, is how do we engage our people, right? And there's a lot of e-learning out there that looks a little bit like this, right? This may be familiar to you. So the question is this doing the trick? Is this kind of e-learning engaging your employees? And hey, it was such a fun and engaging activity to click through the e-learning course. Especially loved waiting for the audio to unlock the next button. Said no one ever, right? This is not how we're going to engage people and pull them in and motivate them. But there's a little bit of a misnomer, right? So people think, okay, this is this is what we don't want to create. Therefore, what we want to do is we want to make it fun. We want to add gamification. That's gonna be the antidote against boring e-learning and make it better. So, Joel, what do you think about that? You think gamification is the answer to everything?
That was about 8 years ago, when you put gamification in every session title. All you needed a dead body to speak about it, and the house was full. That was the silver bullet that's going to solve everybody's problem. Just like today, we have all kinds of other technology. Right now, we're in the phase of reality, so it's actually a good phase to join because the hype is gone. Now we can take a look at and see what actually works, what actually we can use, rather than just going with the hype and trying to create entertainment that people look at like, oh, this is a lame game. How does that gamification? So today, our actual goal is, as the title suggests, level up your learning and answer the question: does gamification work with engagement and motivation? And if it does, how?
And so, if we think about that, how do we engage and motivate people? Let's turn a little bit to the theory, and the hint is it's not by adding jazz hands and what I call clicky clicky bling bling, right? Like just throwing a game, slapping a game onto an e-learning course is not going to necessarily engage and motivate people. So, what's the underlying theory or kind of pedagogy behind what we're doing and why we're doing it? So, Jolt, we have sort of two theories that we'd like to think about with regard to this.
And we're not going to get into the theory details of that. If you don't know self-determination theory, you can Google it and have a coffee and a whole basically dinner while you're reading through this. But generally, I think this is one of them, one of the theories out there that you should know about. For one, it's because you don't have to start from scratch, because motivation and engagement doesn't work logically. What you think is logical and will motivate people might not actually motivate people. So having a theory that actually has a framework is a starting point, and you don't have to start from scratch. And if you see that in the self-determination theory, the main ingredients here are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So the more you have in your offering, in your design, out of these three, the more likely that people will be engaged and motivated and do things that maybe they do not now. Now, how to do that is kind of a different story, but at least these elements should be there. Say, it doesn't say entertainment anywhere. It doesn't say fun anywhere, actually. What it says is you have to give them autonomy so they can make their own choices. It should feel that they're learning something. There's a competence element in it, and there's a bigger picture of relatedness to others, a social element in that. The second theory that might be useful here is Keller's arc theory. And then it basically comes down to attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. And this shouldn't be familiar, actually, if you design e-learning today or just any type of learning. You have an attention-grabbing part of that. Show them relevance to their job, because if they don't see the relevance at the beginning, it doesn't matter how you gamify things or even whatever you do after you lost them. Confidence building by the end that they can do something that they could not before, and then it gives them satisfaction in their job. So these two theories, I think, the basics that you can start with, learn about, and keep in mind as we go through today. We come back over and over to these elements.
Excellent. Thank you, Professor Schultz, for that tour down theory lane. I love it. So for all of you now on the webinar session, a challenge for you to consider: what do the following four things have in common? And we want you to throw your thoughts into chat. So horses, learning, engagement, and motivation. What do those following four things have in common? Just throw some ideas in chat. Maybe it's too mysterious. Those mysterious horses are back, right? No one?
There is no right or wrong answer per se, because we're asking for your opinion and not the fact. But these four things have something in common. Now, the learning, engagement, and motivation you might have some ideas about, but how does the animal, the horse, comes here might be the mystery element.
Elizabeth or Audie says they allow you to go forward. Stephanie.
That's
Steph.
You drive it. I like
um, yeah. So what do these things have in common? Horses, learning, engagement, and motivation. Stephanie nailed it. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And similarly, you can design the best conditions for learning, engagement, and motivation, but that's not going to make people learn, be engaged, or get motivated, right? So you can't, you could design an awesome game and people still don't find it very useful or very interesting or very applicable. So, um, I think there's a lot of different conditions that we all experience that may, I may love like Angry Birds. Actually, I don't love Angry Birds. Others may love it. Others may hate it. Right. So we don't all gravitate towards the same kinds of experiences. That the same things don't motivate us. So Joel, let's think about how we can translate that into something actionable, at least for digital learning design. Right. So, what can we do with this information?
Sure, and I think this is a point that I want to make that is very important, that we're not designing, we call ourselves, most of us, learning designers, and we're not actually designing learning. What we're designing is the conditions, the best conditions as we can to create that environment when people can learn. But we don't make people learn. We don't engage people, and we don't motivate people. The more you read about motivation theory, the more you can see that you can't just go out there and motivate people. That's an internal process, just like learning. So today we're focusing on these conditions. And rather than throwing darts in the dark, let's just pick up something and throw in points. And now we have gamification. Let's think about the motivation part of it and how that translates into our world. Because so far this was probably, it makes sense. It's very theoretical. But what do I do with this information tomorrow? So instead of actually talking gamification, let's talk a little bit about game thinking, which is more like thinking like a game designer and solving problems. So thinking like a game designer, acting like a problem solver. And if you step away from your gamification focus, and again, like gamification will not and never be the starting point. It's not going to replace instructional design. The starting point of your world is not content, and then throw on some kind of elements like usually what people do is scores and leaderboards and badges, and now we're done. The starting point still, what you do today, it's needs assessment, goals, what are the business needs, what are the performance goals, so those need to be done before you even get here. The reason is, and this is what kind of like the gamification and game thinking side effect, is that games and gamification are related to actions and decisions interactions. They're not related to content. You cannot gamify content. It's going to be miserable. What it starts with is things that you do on the job, in our case. So you have to focus on those interactions, actions, and decisions what people need to do, and not the learning per se, but what you actually have to do with that information at the end. And so if you think about that as a problem-solving methodology or systematic thinking, then the outcome of how you do it could be different depending on your problems. So what you see here is a colorful landscape of things that can come out of at the end once you have all your ducks in a row and figuring out the details of how you want to approach the problem. Now, on the bottom, you'll see a arrows left to right. On the left all the way, it says no gameplay. On the right, it says serious gameplay. So what that represents is how much actual gameplay happens in the solution. If you go all the way to the right, those are the absolutely immersive game type of experiences. If you go all the way to the left and no gameplay, there is no gameplay. You can even recognize there's a game. The reason why you need to be aware of that is most of us will have limited resources, time, and tools to create these experiences. So if you don't have the enough resource to create the best learning game ever that's out there, so Warcraft EDU or whatever, that doesn't mean you don't do anything. It means that you need to find the simplest way to approach and fix your problem. So just a quick example for each so you have an idea of what we're talking about. If you go all the way to the right, serious gameplay, top open world games, self-expression. So imagine if you ever played Minecraft, there's a Minecraft EDU version. Then kids go in and they're completely immersed in a world, and they create their own world inside that world. They can do whatever they want. They can build towns, they can build cities, animals, all kinds of things. Now, that's used to learn a lot of things today about geology, biography, whatever that is, inside this whole magical world. It's probably not likely that you're going to use that in your world. If you do, you're a lucky person to work with all these like very expensive and large projects. Now, more likely you're going to encounter serious games where now you have a gameplay, but it's less robust. That's engaging in per se creating anything you want. It's more restricted, but it's focused on learning. So the serious games could be a simple game that has one core element that you work with all the way through almost like a simulation type of great element with 3D and VR and whatever that you do. So it's a wide range. But the point is that you play a game, and through the game you learn something. This serious game is also called game-based learning or learning games, same type of concept. So this focus here is to actually build a game end to end, and through that game, while you're playing, you're learning something. If you move a little bit further down, then you get to the gameful simulations. We'll see an example later on here what it means. So simulations are a little bit closer to reality. We try to mimic a process that happens in reality, but add on gameful elements into that. So for example, there's a time that you can stop. Like in real life, you can't stop the time and go back in time and change your answer or change the consequences of your actions. But here you can have lifelines, that type of thing, a safe environment to practice over and over again before you go to reality. In the middle, right there, there's game-based assessments. So this is your typical Jeopardy game type of, for example. You know how to play Jeopardy. All you do is just replace the content with your content. It's less about learning new things. It's more about feedback and learning, kind of like the assessment, pre-assessment or post-assessment of where you are with knowledge. It's less used, again, to introducing brand new things. It would be frustrating to try to answer things that you don't know yet. If you move on the left, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time today, is the no gameplay. No gameplay is basically, or less gameplay, is when you're not learning through playing a game, but you interact with elements of a game. Now, out there in the world, there's a war going on of definition between gamification and game-based learning or game design, and what's what. This is a scale. It's not really a this or that. It's a scale of how many game elements can you add to something that's not game until it looks like and acts like a game. So action content gamification, we'll show an example today, and that is when you take your content and your actions in your design, and from game thinking, you apply elements that make it a little bit gameful as you go through, but all supporting your learning goals and then performance goals, not just adding on things on top to make it look more like a game and more engaging. And as you go up, you get to the structural gamification. Call these structural gamification is the very typical one when you have a video up there and your boss says, we need to have more completion on this video. So you add points or badges when someone completes the video. That has nothing to do with learning. You don't change any of the content. You don't change any of the actions inside. You just add on something that motivates people to actually watch the same video that you would otherwise not. And then finally up there, you might even end up with no game at all. It may be just the playful design of the actual interface can help people motivate. An example for that is, I've seen this, it's a login, and people want to make sure that you type in a password that's long enough and secure enough. And the more you type in, the more funnier animations come up. They're looking at you how you're typing, type of thing. So it kind of encourages you to type in longer and longer words, which is in return the motivation and the goal for that. There's no gameplay here, but it's kind of like a playful way of telling you to make your password more secure. So we'll get back to this later on, because one of the questions I always get here is, but how do I know where do I go from here? Which one shall I take? Which one shall I go with? The more you go on the right, the serious gameplay, the harder it gets to create, the more resource you need, and the more experience, because you're actually building a game. And there is a absolute no excuse for not playing games for that. You cannot create games, learning games, if you never ever created and played seriously games, because those games are going to look like your last game you played. So everything's going to be either Angry Birds or Uno. You need to have an experience of looking at games, how they're structured, what are the elements inside, to be able to create something new and helpful. So I hope that was a good introduction for the fact that we're not just focusing on what gamification is and start adding something on top of your content, but more like think about game thinking as designers think about games, and then decide which way you go. Try always the least and simplest way of solving a problem.
So you could probably, Jolt, spend a whole session just talking about this thing and examples. So certainly there's more to come on this topic. And Jolt, I know you're working on an article for ATD. It might be a good time to plug that. It won't be published until January, but I know you're going to be getting deep into some of this in that article.
Yeah, so if you're interested in learning more and some actionable items, kind of like a check sheet type of thing, I'm working on this publication, TD at Work, for games and gamification. It's going to come out in January from ATD, and it's going to have your 21-day game plan of how to apply this, how to use it, how to decide based on what your learning goal is, what is the best way to approach that from a gamification perspective, what are the steps in your organization to socialize that and run through that type of thing. So obviously a lot more in 20 pages than one slide. And so now that we talked about the conditions and the type of gamification or game thinking and the outcome, I just wanted to capture this on one slide of how we do it here at Kineo when you go through projects. And it's easy to remember. We call this like the A game squared approach. So first of all, application of game thinking is what we're talking about today. Thinking like a game designer, acting like a problem solver. So always focusing on the job, the actions, the decisions, the end result, and not the learning part. Second is authentic. Again, back to our self-determination theory, or ARCs, is you need to show relevance to the learner before you even gamify anything. You need to show the context of why is it, challenge them, and focus on the authentic needs and goals. But we show that is authentic needs and goals. This authenticity doesn't mean that you have to recreate something literally what it looks like and acts like in reality. You focus on the cognitive part of it, just practicing somewhere in a safe space when you can fail, and then take that to reality. Measurable is something that is good to have. Today's environment, everybody's data-driven. There is so much you can capture inside a gameful interaction than just a normal e-learning when it's completed and the score is 80. Right now, you can capture this, compare before and after. You can see confidence sliders, that type of thing. It's all available now with the technology. And then finally, which is the more important part of here, is this E squared. Engaging and effective. You can create something that's absolutely engaging and learn nothing from it. You can create something that's absolutely not engaging, dry as a drill. I almost used a word that's not HR appropriate, but it's effective. Like, you can just sit down with a piece of paper and memorize stuff, which we used to do. The power of these two together is the engagement and effectiveness. If they support each other, then you can create something meaningful and something effective within the gamification space.
Excellent. I like challenge the mind, not only the mouse, right? It's not about clicking, and we can engage people just by challenging them cognitively and getting people to think. So engagement doesn't need to be lots of clicking, lots of dragging. I think that's a really good model for thinking about it. So let's look at an example, a game design element. Polling and voting. I love this example. Jolt found this. We can turn a passive viewer into an engaged activist. So here, the poll is actually taking a physical cigarette butt and voting, right? Is dropping a cigarette butt on the ground littering? Yes or no? By allowing people to express their opinion here, we're getting them more involved, right? So we're actually solving a problem, because in this case, these people aren't littering at all. They're all putting their butts into this, I don't know what you call this, a device, a butt sorter. So we're getting people to do what we want them to do, but they're also learning about it. We're creating some awareness. So this is a kind of simple game design element out in the real world, out in the wild, and we cleaned up the street, right? So that was really the goal. We through this little gameful interaction, or this game design element, it wasn't us, a behavior change. We solved a specific problem. And so you can think about game elements in some, just kind of different ways than perhaps you have in the past with a model like this. So the challenge is, what game design elements should you use? And what do you all think? What game design elements create the best conditions for engagement and motivation?
So before they think about it, or maybe they can think about it, but what's your favorite game, Cami, that you like to play?
Well, recently, that's a good question. So recently, my son is 16, and he plays lots of shoot 'em up games and D&D. Like, he's super into role playing games. So he has me into this game called Persona 5 recently, and it's on the PS4. And usually, I get too overwhelmed. There's too many things I have to click on, and too many artful, I don't know, just interactions I have to remember. But what I really like about Persona 5 is there's a super strong narrative. It's all about these characters, and you're trying to figure out this greater mystery of this world. And there's archetypes, and kind of there's just this very strong narrative. And for me, that's really compelling. That pulls me through. I always want to know the plot of something.
Yeah, so the narrative part, the immersed inside the story, that drives you, and that makes you play the game. So what about you? Anybody from all over the world? What game you play? What is your favorite game, and why? So what are those elements of that game that's motivating, that you always think about when you don't play the game? Like, oh, it's gonna be exciting to sit down again and play the game in a safe environment, not when you're walking the street. But what are those elements that you like, and you think it's motivating to plugging into games? I play a lot of games. It's just, I think, part of what I do. And in that publication in January, I'll have a sheet. It's a kind of like a check sheet of how to play games. I call this like the determined practice kind of thing. It's not just playing the game for fun, but playing the game for analyzing how and why it works, and what are those motivation elements, how they work together. So let's see if there's anything out there that you like. Motivated exploration. So Deirdre said it's a exploration part, wild scream journey, etc. Karen likes the reaching the next level, and you feel like you've accomplished something. I don't know if any of you played back then when Facebook started the Zynga games, and we did. I think the first one was Mafia Wars, when we beat up each other very well, and then the second one was less problematic and less physical. It was Farm Wheel and something, and we just clicked on things and grew things together. So all these things felt like really good when your crop finally came out and you harvested. Nothing to do with reality, but we felt like we accomplished something, so it was kind of fun. Minecraft, again, exploration, creative liberty. Again, that's the open world when you can just go in and do whatever you want. Feel free. It's absolutely probably the opposite of what you saw in the beginning with the e-learning, when you have one slide, one content, one audio, and a locked button at the end. So you see that even just among us, everybody loves different things. So achievements, leveling up, explorations. The problem that poses is when we do or try to do and add some of these game elements, how do we do that? Like, how do we create something that people will be motivated by if everybody likes different things? And it's a absolutely fair question. It's not just what we say, there's a whole body of evidence out there that people actually are motivated by different things. And when you have players out there interacting with a game, they experience this differently. Just like learning, what you need to be careful with, and this is a common mistake that beginners commit, is that if I love Angry Birds, I'm going to build Angry Birds type of training. If I love Jeopardy, my training is going to be always Jeopardy because I love it. It doesn't mean that everybody else loves those elements. So the question is for us as designers, how do we design something that has some little thing for everyone? So you don't come back with feedback of half of the people loved it, they're on the top of the leaderboard, and half of them are just basically hated the whole thing. So the question is how to do that. So let's see what help we have out there. So this is a periodic table of gamification elements by Andrei Martsevsky. He's in the UK, gamification guru in the UK. You can always go back and gamify.uk and find his writings and research and and learn a lot about excuse me, about users and user interactions. So this is a colorful picture. What is it good for us? One is 52 elements, game design elements that we can use for either building a game or building gamification when we just pick some of these and we make a motivated exercise, a motivated interaction in learning. So if you run through some of these, you mentioned probably exploration was right here. Somebody mentioned levels. He has on his side definitions for these, so you can read through what it means generally. And in my publication in January, you'll see I added the learning part of it. So what does, for example, quest or exploration could be used? What does it look like in learning? So there's more to that. So first of all, it's 52 different elements, which is a good start. But adding 52 different things to a 10-minute e-learning is going to make it probably like an hour long, which is not good. What else we can use this chart for? As you can see, it's color-coded. The color code actually means something. At the bottom, you'll see the the labels here, and the brown ones are about rewards. This is what usually we think about gamification, that you do something and I'll reward you for that. But you feel the same in games as well. There's a reward mechanism built in. And you can think about different types. It can be randomly happening, it can be timed, you can be fixed when you achieve something. The gray ones are the general themes around games and gamification. So you can have a theme, a narrative, you can have a strategy, and you probably all use these today for your learning, or some of these for your learning as well. The interesting part will be the other colors. So there's pink, green, blue, orange. Those are grouped elements that just based on their nature, they motivate a certain type of player or user. And he named as these, this is a evolving, I think, exercise. It started out with all the way from the beginning when the mods came in the first games, and they have 4 types. These are not learning types. I wanted to make sure that this is not learning style, learning styles. And please make sure that you don't spread the learning styles general theory. It does not work that you match someone's learning styles and teaching styles and something the outcome will be better. Again, so these are not learning styles. These are just type of people and players or users that are more motivated, more likely motivated by the type of event. So this colorful thing helps you in a couple of ways. The first thing that when you think about gamification, and here is probably the PBL, points, badges, leaderboard. Now, if you locate points, badges, and leaderboard on this colorful chart, you can see they're all in the purple. Those are the competitive players. So these are the ones who do anything and everything to be on top of a leaderboard. Those are the people who go out with a friendly bowling exercise, and they're gonna hate you if they just beat them once. Those are the ones who do anything and everything for points. All external prizes, love them. So what happens is when you build something that's rely on motivation from points, leaderboards, and badges, these people are going to come back and they love you. They say it's the best thing ever since sliced bread. But you're going to see that you lose every other color. And you can actually demotivate a lot of people at the bottom because they can see they will never, ever get to the top of the leaderboard. And your problem is not motivating the top 10. They're already motivated anyway. So these colors help you and show you a little bit of how to have a balanced approach when you think about your design. Pick something from each and in some ways integrate that in your design so you have something for everyone rather than just focusing on one of these elements. And that leads to our mysterious horses here that we started originally. So this is the Pusta 5. This actually exists. This is a daily exercise and entertainment in the Pusta in Hungary. You can see these horses flying. This guy is standing on the right too, one leg on one, the other one the other leg, and they're just flying through the prairie. Now, the good thing about, interesting thing about this is that it didn't exist for a long time, this whole thing. I mean, it's crazy anyway, but it didn't exist until an Austrian painter decided to draw this. And it's like, hey, what a fun thing would be if this existed. And then these guys like, oh, that's a good challenge, which is a game element. Hey, that's a good challenge. Let's try it. So they build this, and now they do 5, 7, 9, and 11 horses. The point of this is that each of these horses in this element needs to play a role. It has to be perfectly balanced. You can't just pick random 5 horses and try that. It's going to be dangerous. You have to make sure that they work well together, not just individually be strong, but they know what their role is when they put them together. Just like gamification elements, when you put them together in one, they all feel and look like they're part of the one thing, and they all have one goal to drive, and this is your learning and performance goal. If you just pick random things on that chart and put them together, they're going to feel weird. Just like cooking, opening up random ingredients in your kitchen probably won't work. So that's kind of like the story behind it.
Let's see what it looks like, Zsolt. Let's see how to pull it all together. So kind of the message you're saying is we don't want everything to be purple. We want to have a broad mix so that we're pulling in different game design elements into an experience to create something that's going to appeal to kind of as many people as you can, right? Understanding who your audience is. And ultimately, I think a key point to be thinking about as we're thinking about how to implement this is that creating a cutting edge experience, and I'm using air quotes here, doesn't have to mean it's expensive technology. It's really the thinking that goes behind it. You can do a lot of cool things with whatever the tools and resources that you already have, but it's applying these principles to that. So Zsolt's going to walk us through an example right now for a client and a project that we've worked on recently, and I think you'll start to get a sense here. He's highlighted all the elements that he pulled into this experience. So you can see how it really kind of broadly creates that balance. You've got 5 horses running at the same time here, right?
We have lots of horses. So this project, it was an interesting project. It's a long project, so you'll see a lot of these highlights here, but it's altogether about 10 hours of learning for volunteer firefighters and 4 different roles. And in this case, we have an e-learning that's out there. They take and they starting from together, kind of in the cohort type of thing, and then they select their own tracks. So it's particular for that role what they volunteered for. And one of those tracks, the recruiters have a follow-up ILT, a one-day hands-on experience followed up. So when we designed this, we didn't just randomly start gamifying things. And one of the advantage of gamification and game design, going back all the way to game elements, is that you don't start with content. If you start with content and you build out your content, your outline and all that traditionally we work with content, and you look at this, you think, I cannot add all that stuff on top because it's already 30 minutes. If you add all that stuff, it's going to be like 2 hours, and we're out of time, out of scope. This approach actually forces you to think in actions and decisions and interactions. It's not that we're building this on top of the content. This is how they interact with the content. And so we're going to show you a everyday tool storyline that most people have, articulated storyline. Nothing fancy technology, but the design. How does that work in daily applications? So if you look at this, our design workshop with the client revealed that morale is something that's very important in the core of their goals. If morale is low, then people leave because it's a volunteer firefighter job. People leave, and then that kind of spirals into a problem because you don't have enough people. They need to work harder, longer hours, which demotivate people. So morale became the meter itself. So all through this story and narrative, as you join a new firehouse and you make decisions, there's a morale meter on the right. So the morale meter is your gauge, a visual constant feedback of how you're doing. It has a number in it, so it goes up and down with percent of how much morale you have at the company, and also color coded. So it starts with red and it goes up to yellow and green. As you go through these interactions as a storytelling, your score depends on how many times you try to answer a question, which is all about what you do at the workplace. So if you're answering it for the first time, you get more percent raise than the second time, which introduces a little bit of a risk of how you and how much you can lose in a strategy of shall I risk or not your score. One thing I wanted to add to this is we do a lot of play testing. And playtesting, it's if you haven't done any game design, it's kind of a foreign thing because in our design, generally, we don't talk too much to users. We should. But in game design, it's essential to show this, run people through that, and hear the feedback. And all through that, it gets bigger and better and more effective and more engaging because you have real user feedback on them. So you have to do it over and over again. So one of the things that we added once we went through that design session is sound effects, and it's just a simple thing to capture the moment as you gain, let's say 25%, it slowly goes up and there's a ding. And that little thing is enough to create an achievement, a feeling of achievement, rather than just showing that you got 25% here, read it. Simple little things make huge difference, and that's only come through when you start doing playtesting. So again, this is our core element. At the end, they get to this history. So this is the introductions. There's only 2 challenges. The rest of the course have a lot more challenges, but it shows you visually how you did. So if you just look at it, you see that you started with 0 and you went up to 75. There's a fire in the middle that indicates that in that challenge, you lost some of the mojos there. So you can actually decide whether you just jump back and revisit that challenge and fix it, which you see on the top right. Once it's fixed and you get 50 out of 50, you gain. So that little thing is like a history, but it does give you a choice whether you want to go back and retake the challenge itself or revisit the whole content before you take the challenge. Again, that's visual challenges. For those people who were in the orange, the collectors, we have a card system here. So on the left, you see the actual cards. Think about like index cards that include major takeaways from the course. So in this case, it was recruitment and retention people. So learning about these things show progress. As they go through the content, they gain these cards. Inside those cards are basic information, what it is, how to do it, some tip from experts. And then the last tab is actually a free form when they type in how they're going to use this information on their job. So that's how they go through the e-learning part. They're kind of collecting, they're unlocking, again, game elements that works well with the content. It doesn't add on, it's not an add-on, it's part of integrated in the course. But then what happens, and we get very good feedback, we've seen this online and social media, that the course is getting out there, is that in the actual ILT, when these people go to this one-day workshop, our client actually printed out, we designed these deck of cards, which is a real physical cards bridging from the e-learning to the reality. And these people just like, it's so fun. They see their face recognizing the e-learning. They remember now better than what they had before, and they take this home. Something physical that can bridge between the online world and the real world when they do the practice helped a lot, and I got very good feedback on that. And then finally, this is a quick element that I wanted to show with a timer. So a timer, a ticking bomb, a time pressure is one of the first things that people apply to gamification, because every game show has a timer, and it creates some tension and great element. It can backfire very well. If you put a timer anywhere, and it doesn't matter what the timer is, it could be like 400 minutes. If there's a timer, there's a tension. So our approach is one, or guidance is, if your actual physical job doesn't require a time, there's no time pressure, then generally don't use time, because it actually takes away your cognitive focus on the actual thing that you should be doing. It's actually focusing on the timer part. If you want to use timer, there's ways to use timer. Less about punishment. So don't start it as you have to answer it in 5 seconds, and if not, you're dead. Rather than you have to answer it, and if you answer it in a certain amount of time, then you get a bonus or plus. Because in that way you don't have to worry about it, that your time is running out and you choose the wrong answer. The point is the learning and not the timer part. Now, in this case, we did use a timer because it's about firefighters, and they need to make very quick decisions. So they have 171 seconds to complete 3 of these scenarios, read it quickly, choose left or right, and move on. So in this case, it worked, but in your, it might not be the same. And it can backfire those people who are not motivated and actually demotivated by a timer running on their heads.
And Deirdre makes a good comment that timers can pose an accessibility issue for people who are readers and screen readers. That's a really good point. I'm going to interject here and say we now have a timer going because we have 10 minutes left and we still have a bunch of stuff to go through. We want to show you some examples. So I'm going to pick up our pace, Zsolt, here, so we can keep moving. We want to show a few more examples as we go through of just how different elements within game thinking can create different types of experiences. And I think that the IAFC example that Zsolt just showed, which was all built in Storyline, shows how you can really intersperse a lot of different gameful elements throughout this. It was an 8-hour e-learning experience, spread out over time, plus an ILT. This is a very different experience. This is something created for McDonald's. It was a POS or till training program. And it has a lot of game elements. It's a simulation. So as you work through the game, you're tackling the orders of each of these customers. So you're going to hear their voice and you're going to be entering things on a POS system. And then you have all these game elements that don't actually exist in real life. So as Zsolt pointed, I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. This one is really what you might call a gameful simulation. So it's, just thinking about where this lives on this model. Here's a few other screenshots so you can see we have, you'll be addressing a bunch of different customers and you're having to think about what's the right response. So you actually hear their voice and then you have to make a choice, do I say, what can I help you? Hey mate, how you doing? Can I take your order? And then you'll hear them say what they are ordering, and you're entering it into the POS system. You have all these game elements here on, I'm not sure if you can see those so well, but there's timers and lifelines, and you can stop the clock and you can turn back time. So creating a really powerful gameful simulation to help teach people these skills. And it's interesting, we get a lot of queries from people who work at McDonald's all over the world who want access to that game, because we used to have a case study up on our site about it, and it really does fill a need because it's putting all of that information, all that training, all those skills into a real context that people can be practicing and then take out into the real world. So that wasn't created in Storyline; it was created in that's an older Flash course, but I think, again, it's not about the technology. You could probably do something like that in Storyline. It just might take a lot of variables and thinking. So don't be too hung up on the tool. Zsolt's going to show us another example of, I think this is what you would really call a simulation, Zsolt, a resource management simulation created in Adapt, which is a multi-device responsive framework. It's open source. Kineo created it. Yeah, so we're showing a lot of different examples in different technologies. So Zsolt, talk us through this one.
Sure. So Adapt creates a modern responsive design, and our challenge here was to create something that's more than just a content presentation. It looks absolutely beautiful. You can make beautiful things in Adapt, but we wanted to challenge ourselves to add something that's a lot more simulation type. So in this case, you have time, budget, and client satisfaction that you work with. So you have 125 days and 20,000 coins to complete a e-learning project from end to end. And as you go through, you can see on the left, we have the time, budget, and client satisfaction as a starting point. As we go to go through the next slide, this is what a simple interaction could look like inside. And so basically, we need to decide our internal kickoff meeting. Should we skip the internal kickoff? And it's not going to cost us a thing. It's going to be, time-wise 0 and money-wise 0, because obviously you do nothing. Or we can have some people attend the internal meeting, or everyone attend the internal meeting. And as you think about that, it's basically you're spending your resources wisely, hoping that that actually relates to and a good customer experience, but you also want to make money, and you don't want to run out of time. So in this case, if we pick the number 1, so let's just skip, we don't need that meeting, you get some feedback, and you see that 20% went down. So because our team is not on the same page, you can get like narrative feedback of what happens. And this is normal. This is just basically not even anything gamified. But what happens here, and this is where interesting things come in, is that just like in real life, when you make a decision today, that affects decisions tomorrow or the week after. So what we simulated here is if we skip, and we pick number 1 here on the left, if we skip the internal meeting and you get to later on to the client kickoff, when you bring people on, the actual cost for the event, no matter which one you pick, is now more than it was before. So basically there's a short-term and long-term impact. And so now if I wanted to bring the whole team, which we should, on a kickoff with the client, then it's going to take 2 weeks, 14 days, and $1,200. If, the other hand, we pick 2, which is not the best one, but at least better than skipping, and some people attend this meeting, and we spend 2 days on the organization and 200 coins, then you see the same event would cost only 8 days. So basically, spending 2 days up front here, it means that it's going to take only 8 days at that point for the client kickoff and not 14. So that simple simulation of reality when events can impact each other that you don't really know. And so you try to find the balance between spending too much now or spending the right amount that gives the satisfaction as well as a good shepherd of your resources. So again, this helps people to get through, learn through a process when there is tools, when there's policies, there's decision to make, and you can show them the impact, and at the end give a little bit of a story and feedback customized based on how you did in the story.
And I will add just that example it's sort of a templated engine that we've created at Kineo to use with clients. So if you're interested in working with us to create that kind of simulation, please reach out, because it's pretty cool, and we've made it really flexible and powerful, so you can create your own, you can have different scores that you're tracking and things like that. The last example we're going to show before we wrap up today is really just taking those gamification elements outside of the content itself. So we've been showing examples inside the content. These are just things that you can add onto your LMS. we hear a lot about leaderboards and badging, and I think for a lot of people that's all gamification is, right? They just want leaderboards and badging, but we know that that's not always the right solution, right? Like I have certainly been in apps and things where the leaderboard matters to me for like the first day, and then I really don't care. That doesn't motivate me. It may motivate some people, right? But you can add plugins. So at Kineo, we implement Totara, which is an open source learning management system. There's a plugin called Level Up, which allows you to add leaderboards and these and stars and ratings right into the content within the LMS. Another plugin kind of add-on product we've been using recently is called MoTrain, and that adds a whole nother level of gamification to the LMS, and in some ways it's a little bit more advanced because you can upvote things, and you can actually be a little bit more advanced in the feedback and the quality of the comments and things that are coming in. Zsolt, you can speak to that a little bit more knowledgeably than I can.
Yeah, so I think with MoTrain, you also have the ability to connect with some kind of an incentivized shop when you collect points and gain just like a loyalty points. That adds on has a lot more control over of how you do. Level Up is a good basic start, and then have more flexibility with MoTrain. But generally, I think again back to our principles of thinking about if trying to find the balance for all kinds of learners. So the way that you motivate people is how they're going to react to that. So if a leadership or a leaderboard is out there, the player is going to be on top of that. But that's just maybe 1/4 of your audience. Others might be motivated by answering questions in a forum, so they feel like they are the gurus of knowledge and they share this knowledge for free with others. And you see that all over the forums online. They don't want to be, I don't care about the leaderboard anymore. They just want to be acknowledged by their peers. And if you create that sense, now you have 50% of your audience engaged. If you add some kind of surprise elements and explorations, then you have those people who like to just figuring out how it works and don't give me too much instructions, just let me see what I can get out of the system. So once you pick those elements and add them up and provide them, then you have a better chance to grab them and keep them on the side and motivate them. Now, be careful what you motivate, because they actually do what the motivation aims for, and it might not be what you're aiming for. A quick example is if you want to have social interaction on your site and you decide to add points, and you add points for every comment. I've seen this implemented so many times. It works well. It works actually very well. They're going to crash the server. They're going to put in so many nonsense comments that you can't even imagine, because you get 1 point for every letter. So the G, enter, G, enter, G, enter, and then you get points for each of them. So when you apply something like that, when you want to provide points, make sure that those points are given for meaningful actions that you want them to do. So for example, a meaningful action could be answering a question and someone says, yes, that was useful. That's when you get the point, rather than just points for anything that you do online. And again, this page is just a reminder of just the principles that how we approach application of game thinking. Think like a game designer, think about actions and decisions, and then solve a problem. And it's not learning, it's actual problem that people need. Use authenticity, show them relevance and context, challenge them. Could be the narrative way, could be any way that's using the authentic needs and goals. Measurable, if you can capture data. A good example as, for example, adding an interaction with some confidence slider that we do. So what you can do is before and after, you can ask how confident they were in the answers, and then collect the data, and you can see the change over time. Some people are overconfident, some people less. And there's a different conversation for those who are overconfident and they have no idea what they're doing, versus those who don't have the confidence, but they know the answers. For a manager, that's a crucial information. And then the last two is engaging and effective. Think about, again, the people with the colors all over. Think about something that's engaging for everyone, overall, work well, and then move on to the last slide. Because we run out of time.
Thank you all. I know we're a little bit over time.
Yeah.
we clearly Zsolt has a lot to say on this topic. We'll be sure to share out the recording of this session so you can capture all the stuff that you might have had to jump off for. We really appreciate your time today. Please send us questions. There was that poll everywhere link earlier. We're going to do some homework as a follow-up to this. Reach out to us with questions and continue the sharing out on Twitter. And